What's up, nerds? Welcome to Pirate Radio, the enterprise IT podcast. Today we're sitting down with Anna Claiborne, co-founder and CTO of PacketFabric. PacketFabric provides carrier-class connectivity on demand to customers of all sizes. Hear about her life in a startup and the road less traveled. Anna Claiborne, welcome to Pirate Radio.
Matt Brown, thanks for having me.
So, quick question for you. You were a techie who graduated from college and got two offers. The first one was from Intel with their international intern program, a prestigious program in our industry. The other job offer was to be a developer at Tower Records. You took the latter. Explain to me how your brain works.
always take the red pill. that's my theory right there. Or always take the path less chosen, I will say.
I like that.
Yes, the Intel path was very defined. They had a fantastic program for setting you up for executive leadership in engineering, just fantastic. But at Tower Records, it was the wild, wild west. It was right when e-commerce was starting. They had their own website. As a young college kid, previous to that, I had worked at a bank, so I was used to having a lot of range over very important things. And this kind of seemed to continue that trend. Getting to be responsible for most of the digital earnings for a huge brand and getting complete leeway to do that. So you
identified a market opportunity, married that to your red pill philosophy, and here we were.
Yep.
That's
and
awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not necessarily just about taking the path less chosen, but it's about identifying opportunities that aren't obvious too.
Yes.
Because that's like such a huge learning opportunity when you have creative range as opposed to a defined set of things that you're doing. That's a huge learning opportunity.
And then came Napster, right?
Yes.
Or no, Napster was before. Yeah, no, then came Napster. Yeah, I'm doing my timing's right.
Yeah, it was about at the same time. And actually, funny enough, we started offering MP3s on the website about that time too. It was just like from the much lesser known catalogs and labels that would do that. And so it was very much like I was a huge proponent. I wanted to sell MP3s on the website starting right away, but it wasn't that easy. And many revolutions of Apple iTunes later and DRM, and here we are finally at that today.
A lot of unread terms and conditions allowed that to happen, right?
Yep.
Yep, exactly. So you identified and jumped headfirst into that market opportunity. How did you determine there was a market need for PacketFabric or whatever it was called at that point? Just a thought in your head. You'd go on to create. How did you decide that there was an opportunity there?
Yeah, it was still PacketFabric. Even back at the beginning when we were first talking about it, it kind of had a preordained name, even though the idea was slightly different. And it was actually really easy. Well, I shouldn't say easy. It was obvious. The opportunity was obvious from my particular point of view because cloud computing, around 2014, 2015, that's when cloud computing was on its serious upswing, right?
Yeah.
You weren't racking and stacking servers anymore and procuring them and, spending, weeks and months configuring all your zero-touch provisioning, and that just wasn't a thing anymore. Instead, you were moving to using a UI and an API to click and spin up 1 or 1,000 servers. And it was like, an obvious like, well, why can't you do this with network?
Yeah.
Why doesn't the networking component, especially the wide area networking component, work like that? Because it should. If you can spin up 1,000 servers, but it takes you still 3 months to get any sort of decent connectivity back to, say from your cloud to your co-location, what's the point?
Well, then how would the infrastructure team blame the networking team? That's, that's a time-honored tradition that I feel like you're messing up, you can't blame the network team anymore.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you can still blame the network team, just not for the speed at which they do things.
Okay.
We're only just taking away that thing.
That feels like a good concession. We'll take that. So, um, so with PacketFabric, when did you have the moment where you're like, "Yep, we're going for it. We're starting an enterprise technology company"?
So it was, I mean, it was pretty much the time that somebody wanted to give us a lot of money.
Nice,
that, that,
nice.
that was the moment that it's like, okay, we're going for this. And I say that jokingly, but it is relatively serious because we're not just a software company. We
Yep.
are a SaaS company, but we're also an infrastructure company. And infrastructure is not something that can be bootstrapped or started on a shoestring. You need some serious capital investment in order to invest in infrastructure. And so it was at that time, my co-founder, brilliant co-founder Jezebel, she had found us some initial funding, and that was the time at which we decided that it was a go, because not only did we have the idea and the execution plan, but now we had the capital to back it.
And did you go through presentations, to venture capitalists and all that? Did you have to go through that process, or was it some sort of relationship that was made outside of one of those, a VC firm?
So it was a lot more strategic. We actually didn't pitch the original idea around much, and pitching it to VCs would have been tough anyway, because VCs are pretty infrastructure averse. It's private equity firms that are really interested in investing in infrastructure, and they're interested in once you've already built something.
Yeah.
So it's a tough market to get into, which explains why there aren't a ton of infrastructure startups.
Bit of a chicken and the egg, right? With
Yeah.
you need money to start an infrastructure company, you need infrastructure just to get the money.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's very chicken and egg. And we were fortunate enough to find a high net worth individual, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, who's a big investor in the biotech, medical, and genetic space. And he well understood the problem, because dealing in the biomed spaces, you're dealing with moving around huge files, whether that's a human genome or a CAT scan or X-rays, depending on the specific area that you're working in. And so he was intimately familiar with having to move big data and not having a good way to do that, and having all these poorly connected, especially medical facilities out there. So he was able to instantly connect with the problem and understood what we wanted to do.
And he'd realized that there's an opportunity beyond just the healthcare space, and this is something that's going to solve problems for. He understood your message. It was going to solve problems for, industry wide.
Oh yes, absolutely. He understood that. He got that it wasn't just the medical space, that this was applicable to any and every vertical that exists out there. Whether it's even in like big industry, like an interesting sort of analogous problem, and this is from like farm and agriculture industry, is that you have all of these big either mining machines or farming machines out there now that collect all this data about the environment, about themselves, and then they need to upload this information back to some central place for processing. And you're dealing in like very horribly connected, like rural areas. And so it's a very analogous problem to the same thing that the same problem that the medical space faces, of having, these really poorly connected facilities that need to move all this big data. And so that's just like one very small example of the fact that this problem pretty much exists everywhere, just in different forms.
Yeah. Downtown San Jose doesn't have a thriving mining industry.
Surprisingly enough, no.
Believe it or not, it's there's a lot of talk, but as of now, it's not there, right?
I know, it shocked me too, but
there. So as a founder with a technical background, in software development, when you get funded, how much pressure do you feel to deliver a product? How much time do they give you? What does that process feel like? Of getting funding to delivering a usable product to the market?
So the pressure, I think, largely depends on your investors as far as any external pressure. Some investors are very like hawkish and hands-on and want to see things on a timeline. Some are very hands-off. Most of the investors that I've dealt with throughout my career have been very hands-off. And so like the pressure is entirely internal, right? Because once you start working on something, you go, okay, well, we have X amount of dollars and our burn is this much and it's going to carry us this far. And so the pressure all comes from the financial aspects that you have 15 months or to get a product to market, to start making money. And if it then follows your financial plan, you're offsetting your burn by this much for this long, and then eventually reaching profitability. And so it's entirely the pressure is almost entirely like internal. And it's because if you've done your homework and know what you're doing, you know exactly how long you're going to last before that money runs out, when you need to start making money and how much you need to start making.
Yep. And the other external pressure of hoping that Google doesn't think this is a good idea to invest in at the same time, right?
Yes, there's always that, but it's the old saying that luck is when preparation meets something that I'm blanking on right now.
Opportunity, I think.
Opportunity, yeah.
Opportunity, yep.
Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, and if like I said, if you prepared, the pressure all becomes internal, and the chances of someone else preparing as well as you have are small.
Yep. And they're and have the focus and the talented team, and you look at big organizations, and they, they're good at process, they're good at building process systems and all that stuff. They're not usually good at innovating, and even the Googles over time will lose the edge in innovation, and they'll have to acquire it with folks like you guys.
Yep. And yeah, that is totally true. That is totally true. It actually really makes me wonder, like, that's been one of the things that I've always wondered, is if there's any way to escape that eventual outcome and that trajectory. Like, do all businesses necessarily have to slow down on innovation once they reach a certain size? Is there always a plateau? Is there a way to escape that? I don't know.
You hear things like Amazon's rule around, no meaning that, that's more than 2 pizzas, so it can be me and one other person from our team, because I can eat a whole pizza by myself. but I think as you get big, you really have to try to maintain the innovation stuff, which is hard, but you have to make it a priority. And some companies do a good job of it for a long time. I personally think it's inevitable that you lose it at some point, but you see some organizations hold on to it longer than others. But I think it's very difficult.
Yeah. I think I find very few exceptions to the rule. I mean, I think you kind of pointed out Amazon, Google, maybe exceptions to the rule, but I mean, a lot of the Google Lab stuff, does die. Yeah. And Amazon, where they don't acquire technology, they kind of have a bad habit of copying or, borrowing it. So is either of that really innovation anymore? I'm not sure.
You look at like a Microsoft, and they, put a lot of effort into Teams over the last couple of years, but, with Slack ahead of them, did they come up with the ideas that the giant software factories, borrowed? Borrowed because they've got a lot of lawyers. I don't want to say the word steal.
That's why I borrowed. I thought was an excellent choice of verbiage.
That was an excellent. I think I avoided all liability for slander there.
Yes.
If it comes back and you hear it's beeped out when we publish this, you'll know that I got good advice not to. But speaking of advice, what advice do you have for other people looking to start businesses inside and outside of technology?
So first off is, go with what you know. You'll be infinitely better off in a market or a space or anything where you have some background and intimate knowledge of the technology, people, everything that you're surrounding yourself with. And, the next is have a plan. You can't, there's a million good ideas and it all comes down to execution. Like,
Yep.
So many times I see people who are starting something concerned, oh, well, someone else has the same idea. It doesn't matter because there's a million people out there with this idea, but only one or two will ever execute on it well. And
Yep.
so that's the thing, like execution, like having your logistics down, because logistics is part of just about any business that isn't pure software, and even some that are pure software. I mean, Amazon is a logistics company.
Yep.
So having, any logistics down and having a firm handle on your costs and any of like the potential risks out there that could bite you out of nowhere. For example, if you were wanting to spin up 1,000 houses in the short-term rental market, knowing where the particular county stands on short-term rentals and if you need a permit and if they're going to cut them off, that's an important thing to know, right? And that's sort of, that circles right back to the go with what work in an area where you have some of that knowledge, so there's not as many unknowns out there, so you at least know most of your risks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then also, I'm going to give the complete opposite advice to what I just gave, which is sometimes you just got to jump into things. There's a place at which preparing and planning stop doing any good. So it's, plan just enough, but not too much. And you usually have to jump before you're comfortable. Like, there is no such thing as being totally comfortable with a plan or any sort of speculation. Like, you plan enough and then you just go for it. Like,
yep. And that's interesting. Our last podcast with Mike from Rubric, we teased about his philosophy being, hold my beer, I got this. And it is kind of like, at some point you're as ready as you will be without being in it, right? Like you're saying, so much of it just comes from being in it, right? Where you have to go figure out what you don't know, and you're gonna figure it out there.
Yeah, and that's my very first startup was something that I didn't know much about, and I absolutely didn't prepare for it all. So, like, take all advice with a grain of salt, right? Because, and maybe that is the most valuable thing that anybody who's looking to start a company, maybe that is the most valuable thing right there, is just being willing to jump in and deal with the consequences.
Yeah. They'll jump in the deep end of the pool and see what happens, right? Can you swim? You'll figure it out probably, and if not, you'll drown. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are the right. It's pretty safe bet. You'll die.
Either way, you figured it out, right? Yeah. One way or the other.
Either way, you have an answer.
Yes. So, Anna Claiborne, I appreciate you jumping on, taking time for our listeners. We're excited about our partnership with PacketFabric and doing more and bringing your guys' solutions, your team's solutions to the market. So, thank you for everything.
That's awesome. Yes, thank you. And I look forward to us working together as well. I think it's going to be great. At least hopefully as fun as this podcast.
Good. Thank you, Anna.